With the product design of Star Wars ShatterPoint combined with the magic of 3D printing, is Atomic Mass Games giving away a little bit too much for free? And if you're into 3D printing, I'm currently running a Kickstarter for a set of 3 sci-fi military vehicles. More on that in a little bit. So welcome everyone, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. If you've gone and purchased one of the squad packs for Star Wars ShatterPoint, you know more or less what's in here. But as a quick review, of course you get whatever set of miniatures comes with a particular kit. No, a decapitated broadside from 40K is not in there. More on that later. Also in the box though, you're going to get yourself a copy of the stat cards and everything else you need to play with these miniatures for each of the language in which the game is available. Let's talk a little bit about why they're doing this. As a general rule with tabletop gaming or business in general, the answer to this question is it costs less. But how is that the case? Well, for the most part, when it comes to any kind of cardstock thing for tabletop games, whether it be stat cards, playing cards, tokens, whatever, they're generally printed out on a giant sheet of paper, and then they're cut down in their final size using some sort of machine. Normally that's a die-cut machine designed for whatever particular product you're working on, but it could be a laser cutter in some kind of small niche market, lower production run products. And then if you do have multiple languages, like many games do these days, what you would have to do at that point is have some sort of sorting process to ensure that the right languages get all set up together and end up in the correct boxes. Now, of course, this sorting process is going to cost more money. And there's a good chance is that you probably have a person doing those sorting processes, and people are generally even more expensive than machine labor. So by having different boxes for different languages, you've already increased your production costs by quite a bit. And just probably because of the fact that Star Wars ShatterPoint went down this road, there's a good chance that the additional cost of including every single language in this box is probably cheaper than paying either a machine or a person to do that sorting process. And just as a note, Atomic Mass Games is not the first company to do this. Games Workshop, with some of their Warhammer Age of Sigmar Warcry miniature boxes and card packs back in the day, did the same thing, where you'd buy, say, a certain faction's card pack, and you get all the different languages as well. And now the other advantage you're going to get in terms of cost savings is it's going to be logistically cheaper. And what I'm talking about here is the overall delivery chain from the warehouse to the final store. If you've got, say, in this case, I believe 5 languages for Star Wars ShatterPoint, every single product then has 5 SKUs. You got to keep track of those 5 SKUs, but more importantly, those 5 SKUs got to go to the right locations. And if you get in a situation where, let's say, General Grievous is not popular in Germany for some reason, you've got a bunch of German General Grievous boxes you can't really do anything with. However, if all the languages are in every box, you now got one SKU to keep track of, and you can send those boxes to wherever things are selling. So if General Grievous, like I said, is not popular in Germany, but he's doing great in Spain, you can now redirect all your excess German stock over to Spain because it's got, well, the proper languages for both those countries in one box. Before we get into the topic of how 3D printing has any role in all this, I want to talk very quickly about the Kickstarter I'm running for a set of 3 near-future sci-fi military vehicles. You have right here the Griffin hover tank, as well as the Bracer main battle tank and the Archer multiple launch rocket system. These vehicles are designed to be printed out on your standard FFF 3D printers with minimal support, and they look great whether it's 15 millimeters or their standard default size of 32 millimeters. So if you're interested in this thing, you can head over to tabletopbattlefield.com/alliance, and that'll direct you to the Kickstarter, or you can find a link down in the video below. All right, back to the Star Wars thing. So when it comes to Star Wars ShatterPoint, there is something a little bit different about the game when compared to other tabletop miniatures games. In particular, you have an activation deck where you draw the top card, and more or less that's a character you have to activate. I know there's more details to that, but that's beyond the scope of this video. Which of course, when you buy a packet of Star Wars ShatterPoint miniatures, you get the required 3 little activation cards in the box. But oddly enough, you get more than 3. Because, well, as I mentioned, throughout this entire video, every language set comes with 3 of itself, even though there's just English version cards. There's not like any unique text that needs to be on these cards in that particular language. So in fact, When you buy a set of Star Wars ShatterPoint miniatures, you get 5 copies of the activation cards, which, since those are kind of the one really official thing you really need to play the game, you've now got 5 sets of cards that you can then hand out to your friends. So they can go and get some third-party 3D printable miniatures and pretty much play Star Wars ShatterPoint with those miniatures and not buy the actual miniatures themselves. I guess it kind of raises the ultimate question. Is 3D printing really hurting the tabletop gaming industry? I mean, there's tons of options out there. Star Wars Legion, of course, has a whole bunch of 3D printable miniatures. And I've ran some non-official tournaments because, of course, the obvious answer for Atomic Mass Games is to basically say, you can't bring custom 3D printed miniatures tournaments, and that probably helps quite a bit. But there is still definitely a market for non-tournament players out there. And when it came to running some of the Star Wars Legion tournaments in the past where we weren't officially supported by, at the time, was it still Fantasy Flight Games? I don't remember. I don't know, that might have been Fantasy Flight Games back then. I don't quite remember when Atomic Mass Games took over. But the point was, with these unofficial, non-supported Fantasy Flight tournaments, people did bring 3D printed miniatures, but for the most part, it was a relatively small minority, maybe less than 10% of all the miniatures being used were third party, and even in some of those cases they weren't things that people personally 3D printed out. They actually just bought some kind of custom Stormtrooper miniatures from Etsy. One player's around Christmas time had like Christmas Stormtroopers, so just little goofy things like that. Which I guess ultimately then this begs the question, is 3D printing really hurting the tabletop game industry? I mentioned a little bit ago in this video that Games Workshop did the same thing with the multi-language stuff for Warhammer Age of Sigmar Warcry, and of course you don't have activation cards like this for Warhammer, at least not at the current time. You watch the video 20 years in the future, that could change. So does that mean that games, people could potentially, and they do, I do know that people do print up entire 40k armies and, Warhammer Age of Sigmar armies, I always want to call it fantasy battles, Age of Sigmar armies on 3D printers. But we looked at the financial report of Games Workshop just a few weeks ago, and they're still making record revenues, even more than last year. And they didn't even mention 3D printing in their report. They mentioned nothing about third-party kind of compatible, quote, compatible gaming miniatures, as they have sometimes mentioned in the past. So clearly, they don't see 3D printing as any sort of kind of rival to, their main miniature line, and it's clearly not affecting their bottom line yet because they're still raking in even more money each year. Whether that applies to a smaller game like Star Wars ShatterPoint, I guess we're going to find out here in a few weeks or a few months, a year or two, if this game's still around. But maybe, just maybe, we'll wrap this up with a crazy conspiracy theory. We really have no idea, for example, Star Wars Legion, how much that game is being impacted by third-party miniatures. They're all out there, and at some point, I know some people are making stuff for Star Wars ShatterPoint if they haven't already done so in terms of making their own versions of the characters. Maybe, just maybe, Atomic Mass Games made Star Wars ShatterPoint, made it easy to pirate it with 3D printable miniatures, therefore they gained the attention of Disney, and Disney can finally shut down Legion piracy. Oh goodness. Yeah, it's a bit crazy. I honestly don't think Atomic Mass Game cares that much, but at the end of the day, being a licensed property from Disney, almost certainly if someone's going to go after piracy for Star Wars miniatures tabletop games, it's going to be Disney. I really don't think there's some sort of clause in their license agreement for Atomic Mass Games to go after that, because there is some blurriness between what is a miniature for ShatterPoint and what is just a Star Wars action figure. Now granted, maybe Atomic Mass Games can go after people for using terms like ShatterPoint. I believe that is a trademark term. That is, whether that's Atomic Mass Games or Disney is a separate question, but that's probably about the best that Atomic Mass Games can do. Well, there you go. That's another random 3D printing rant from me. So thanks for watching. Once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. I'll see you guys all next time.